Greetings, everyone. Hello from sunny Florida. I'm Heather Frey's daughter, and I'm here to talk to you about my feelings on immersive polytheism and revivalism and why I'm a fan of both. Not that I am not a fan of devotional polytheism, particularly if you are the kind of devotional polytheist that is very honed in on your gods. And pretty much anybody who loves and respects the gods is okay with me. But for myself, I really like the concept of revivalism, mostly because it is a path that emphasizes something called process theology. I don't know if anybody else who's done a vid on it yet has talked about process theology specifically, but process theology is the notion that we affect the gods and the gods affect us and we are interconnected. And I very much believe that that's true. It's my personal doxa that the gods grow and change just as we grow and change and evolve over time. Good example of this is since I'm Lokian, I'll pick on Loki. There is a lot of debate in the Lokian community over whether Loki is a god of fire or not. There are a lot of folk sayings that associate Loki and heat. Is that because summer heat makes the air shimmer? Is that because he was associated with the hearthstone, like the Snapton stone, which is a depiction of him, and it's a bellows? I've had a fair amount of interaction with Loki as both. And I think that's because there are plenty of Lokians that think of him in that way. And so he's like, I'm versatile. I can do that. And that's process theology in action. It doesn't matter whether he was worshipped that way in heathen era worship. It's how we worship him today. And for that matter, I would almost have to be a revivalist or an eclectic because there's really very, very little left on how Loki was worshipped, other than some folk sayings, which I think are interesting and probably do have something to do with the way people worshipped him back then. But we're never going to know. There's no time machine. You can go talk to your ancestors about it, but again, that's still going to be your personal gnosis or your personal doxa. And for that matter, there really was no one unified way to practice heathenry back in the day. How it was practiced in Anglo-Saxon England is a little different than how it was practiced in Denmark versus, Norway and versus Sweden, and even in different regions within those countries. So the fact that I might worship him one way here in Florida does not mean that Joe or Jane Lokian on the other side of the country has to do what I do. And again, if Loki's happy with what you're offering, I think you're probably doing it right. So process theology. And that's not to say that knowing Reconstructionism is useless. I belong to the truck guys. It's interesting. It's to me, it's like knowing where Loki came from, and regardless of how he wants to interact with me today, knowing that X or Y practice was a thing, he still seems to enjoy being given those things. He just doesn't seem to want them exclusively when he interacts with me. So again, the gods grow and change, and so do we. Look at my notes here. The other thing that is a big deal in revivalism that I really like, and I've talked about in my own theological values and practice, is the notion of social justice. I would really like to see more pagan-driven charity work. I don't think that our charities would necessarily be exclusively for other pagans and heathens, but I do think that the communities that we live in need to see that, yes, we do care, and yes, we do take care of others, and then we're less likely to be seen as those scary people who might sacrifice goats or whatever, babies, I don't know, whatever. Not going to go into what things I've had thrown at me here in the Deep South, but seeing that we do good in the community and that we care, and that those people that helped me were of a polytheistic faith or a pagan faith, I think is a good thing. and just, in general, helping people. What good is religion if we can't give comfort to those in need? What good is it if we can't help the mourning, the needy? And a lot of us have our own needs, but fostering a spirit of cooperation is more necessary to me than going pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Not a personal value. And there's a tremendous underrepresentation of minorities in paganism, that in polytheism, that is personally troubling to me. I think we need to be looking at what we are doing collectively and could be doing to make our spaces more friendly and welcoming to people of color, because the gods are for everyone. Finally, I'd like to talk about professional training. I have a little bit of training on my own. I have a background in education and in child find and speech language pathology. What child find, if you don't have it in your area or it's named something else, is going into homes and communities and looking for children who have special needs. And you also kind of triage their family. So, does the family appear to be food insufficient? Do they appear to need counseling? Do they need medical care and they're not getting it? All of these things affect outcomes for children. And so sometimes in my work at the Raven Fairy, which is my local pagan shop, we will get people that need food and need to know where to find it, or they need to know where to find counseling. And being trained on knowing when you should refer, and knowing when it's so that it's not even a matter of choice. It's not even like, hey, I strongly recommend. No, there's violence in the home. I need to call Department of Children and Families. I think we are uncomfortable with those things. And if you're going to be clergy, you need to know when. I'm lucky enough that in my formal education and my former profession, I learned those things. But everyone who gets this sort of work should have access to that kind of training, and talking about how to make that more accessible. It's great and all for people to go to, distance conferences, but not everyone can travel. I have a lung disorder. It's really hard on me to travel. It's not a comfortable thing. People are like, why don't you do pagan festivals? Pagan festivals in my area are all outdoors and they're all smoky, and there is no safe place for me to go and get away from smoke. And not to mention they're not very other disability friendly either, because, wheelchair access, what? But anyway, rant for another day. Again, social justice seeping in there. But training on how to triage people. Because, sometimes when people come in for a reading, they are in crisis. Or if they're talking to you, if the gods have shown up on their doorstep, there's a lot of flail, and being able to separate. I didn't know that people had these experiences versus, no, they're here to help me clean up my life. What are the practical things I can do to help myself so that the gods can help me even more is important. And distribution of those materials and compensation for the people who have time and expertise in that training. I would really like to see more video conferencing, whether it's a Skype session or a Google Hangout or something of that nature. I know that the technology can be limiting for some people too, but I suspect that it's still probably more accessible than saying, hey, travel to XY place in the middle of America or in the East Coast or somewhere in Europe. So accessibility of training materials, I think, would give those of us who are doing sort of clergy type work more tools and more comfort with our ability to do what's being asked of us. And again, having that kind of training would also probably organize us into a more cohesive structure, and then we would be able to provide more social services and help people find resources in the community. And that kind of leads to the last talking point I have, which is about rebuilding temples, whether they are interfaith temples, which is probably the way it would have to start out. But some people are lucky enough to have a UU church nearby. and they can, UU churches are usually pagan friendly, not all of them, everyone's independently led. But Unitarian churches and Unitarian Universalist churches are usually friendly for that, but not everyone has something like that in their town. And I think interfaith temple work would be a good place to start. But we're going to have to stop pecking at each other about whether you're a pagan or a polytheist, and whether you're hard or soft or eclectic. We're enough of a minority that we should be cooperating and not fighting with each other. So anyway, those are my thoughts for now. Comments are welcome. If you're rude, I won't answer them, but spirited debate that is polite is always welcome. So thank you for your time, and thank you for watching.